The scar that ran from Clara Sullivan's temple to her jawline had been called many things by the people of Georgetown, Colorado, but beautiful was never one of them. And after 26 years of living with it, she had stopped expecting anything different. The accident happened when she was 8 years old, a wagon wheel breaking loose and sending her tumbling down a rocky slope. And while her body healed, the mark remained, a permanent reminder that some things could never be fixed. Her mother had passed from fever 2 years after that, leaving her father to raise her alone on their small homestead just outside town. He tried his best, teaching her to read and write and handle a rifle, but he could not protect her from the whispers or the pitying looks that followed her everywhere she went. By the time Clara turned 18, she had already received more rejections than proposals, and the few men who had shown interest quickly disappeared when prettier options presented themselves. Her father told her she was beautiful on the inside, that the right man would see past the scar, but Clara learned to stop believing in fairy tales. She focused instead on practical matters, helping her father with the horses they bred and trained, becoming as skilled as any man with a rope and saddle. When her father died of a heart attack 3 years ago, she inherited the small ranch and the mounting debts that came with it. The bank had been patient at first, but patience wore thin when money was involved. Clara sold off most of the horses, keeping only 3 for herself, and took work wherever she could find it. She mended clothes for the general store owner's wife, helped deliver foals for neighboring ranches, and occasionally worked at the boarding house serving meals to travelers passing through on their way to Denver or the mining camps further west. It was not glamorous work, but it kept the bank from taking her land, and that was all that mattered. Georgetown in the summer of 1878 was a bustling town, swollen with miners and merchants, gamblers and dreamers, all chasing silver in the mountains. Clara kept to herself mostly, speaking when spoken to, smiling politely when required, but never allowing herself to hope for more than simple survival. Her friend Margaret, the schoolteacher who had moved to Georgetown 2 years prior, often tried to convince her to attend the town socials, but Clara always declined. "You cannot hide forever," Margaret said one afternoon as they sat on Clara's porch, shelling peas into a wooden bowl. Margaret was petite and pretty, with blonde curls and blue eyes that sparkled when she laughed. She had suitors lined up like horses at a hitching post, though she claimed none of them interested her much. "I am not hiding," Clara replied, her fingers working quickly through the pods. "I am simply being realistic. There is a difference. You are 26, not 60. You have plenty of time to find someone." Clara shook her head, dropping another handful of peas into the bowl. "I have made peace with my situation. I do not need a husband to be content." "Made peace or given up?" Margaret asked gently. Clara did not answer because they both knew the truth. She had given up years ago after Thomas Miller proposed to her one spring evening only to break off the engagement 3 weeks later when Sarah Henderson smiled at him outside the church. After William Carter told her she would make a fine wife, but he could not bear to look at her face across the breakfast table every morning. After countless dances where she stood against the wall, watching other women whirl past in the arms of men who would never ask her. Giving up was not weakness, Clara told herself. It was wisdom. The peas were shelled and Margaret left before sunset, riding her little mare back toward town. Clara fed her 3 horses, a bay gelding named Rusty, a gray mare called Silver, and a young paint horse she had named Patches for his mottled coat. They nickered softly as she distributed hay and checked their water trough. The evening air was cooling, the mountains casting long shadows across her property. She stood for a moment, breathing in the scent of pine and grass, letting the quiet settle into her bones. She was checking the fence line the next morning when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Clara straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, watching as a rider came into view. He sat tall in the saddle, guiding a large chestnut stallion with easy confidence. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A dark hat pulled low, a blue shirt dusty from travel, and a face that was weathered but striking, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He pulled up a few yards away, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Morning, madam. I apologize for the intrusion. I am looking for the Sullivan place." "You found it," Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. She had learned long ago not to be too friendly with strangers. Men passing through were often looking for easy targets, especially women living alone. "Name is Colt Spencer. I own the ranch about 10 miles north of here, up near the canyon." He gestured vaguely toward the mountains. "I heard you might have a horse for sale." Clara frowned slightly. "I only have 3 horses and none of them are for sale." "I was thinking more along the lines of you finding me one," Colt said, dismounting with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall, she noticed, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean strength that came from hard work. "I heard you have a good eye for horses, that you can spot quality even in rough stock." "Who told you that?" Clara asked, curious despite herself. "Fellow named Murphy at the general store. Said if anyone in Georgetown knew horses, it was Clara Sullivan." Colt's expression remained serious, businesslike. "I need about 20 head of good working horses. My ranch has been expanding and I lost several animals over the winter. I am willing to pay a finder's fee if you can help me locate quality stock." Clara considered this. 20 horses would mean traveling to other ranches, maybe even to Denver or the auctions in Colorado Springs. It would also mean money, probably enough to pay off her remaining debts and buy some new equipment she desperately needed. But it would also mean spending time with this rancher, this Colt Spencer, and she was not sure how she felt about that. "I would need time," she said finally. "Finding 20 good horses is not something that happens overnight. I have time. Within the next 2 months would be ideal, but I understand these things cannot be rushed." Colt reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This is a deposit to show I am serious. $50 now, another 50 when we have half the horses and 100 more when we finish, plus expenses for travel. $200. Clara's breath caught slightly. That was more money than she had seen in months. She could pay off the bank, fix the roof on her barn, maybe even buy a few mares to start breeding again. "Why me?" she asked, needing to understand. "There are plenty of men in Georgetown who know horses." Colt met her eyes directly, and for the first time she noticed they were a deep brown, almost the color of the rich earth after rain. "Because Murphy said you were honest. In my experience, that is harder to find than horse knowledge." He paused, then added, "And because my sister married a man who talked a good game but did not know a sound horse from a lame one, cost her nearly everything she had. I would rather work with someone who has a reputation for integrity." Clara felt something shift in her chest, some small wall she had built beginning to crack. This man was not looking at her scar, was not flinching away or staring too long. He was simply conducting business, treating her like any other person he might hire. "All right," she said, reaching for the pouch. "I will do it. Give me a few days to ask around and see what is available. I will need to know what you are looking for specifically. Age, temperament, experience." "Come by the ranch tomorrow if you are able," Colt said, swinging back into his saddle. "I can show you the operation, explain what I need. Plan to stay for lunch. My cook makes a fine stew, and I suspect we will need a few hours to go over everything." Before Clara could respond, he had turned his horse and was riding away, dust rising in small clouds behind him. She stood holding the leather pouch, feeling its weight in her hand, wondering what she had just agreed to. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling beams of her small bedroom. The $50 was tucked into a tin box under her bed, more money than she had seen in one place in years. But it was not the money keeping her awake. It was the memory of Colt Spencer's eyes, the way he had spoken to her like an equal, like someone whose opinion mattered. She told herself not to read too much into it, that this was business and nothing more, but some small part of her, the part she thought she had buried long ago, whispered that maybe, just maybe, not all men were like the ones who had rejected her. She rose before dawn, as was her habit, and went about her morning chores. Fed the horses, collected eggs from the 3 hens she kept, pumped water for coffee. The routine was comforting, predictable. By the time the sun had fully risen, she had already decided what to wear for her visit to the Spencer ranch. Her good brown skirt and a clean white blouse, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. Nothing fancy, nothing that suggested she was trying too hard, but presentable enough for a business meeting. The ride north took nearly an hour, following a winding trail that climbed gradually into the foothills. The Spencer ranch, when she finally reached it, was larger than she had expected. A substantial 2-story house sat at the center, built from solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a storage shed. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see at least a dozen horses in various paddocks. Colt emerged from the barn as she rode up, wiping his hands on his pants. He was dressed similarly to yesterday, work clothes that had seen better days, but he smiled when he saw her, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Glad you could make it," he said, taking her horse's reins as she dismounted. "Let me show you around before we eat." The next 2 hours passed quickly as Colt walked her through his operation. He ran about 500 head of cattle, selling beef to the mining camps and towns throughout the region. The horses were used for working the cattle, transportation, and occasionally he sold a few to the army or to ranchers further east. He explained that he had started the ranch 5 years ago with money he had saved working as a trail boss, driving cattle up from Texas. It had been slow going at first, but he had built it up through hard work and careful planning. "I have 6 men working for me now," he said as they stood looking out over the main pasture. "Good men, reliable, but we need more horses to handle the workload. I want to expand the herd, maybe bring it up to 700 head by next spring." Clara listened, impressed by his knowledge and his obvious dedication. He was not a dreamer chasing quick riches, but a man who understood the slow, steady work required to build something lasting. "What happened to your winter horses?" she asked. Colt's expression darkened slightly. "A combination of things. We had a hard freeze in February, lost 3 to colic. 2 more got spooked during a mountain lion scare and ended up lame. Another was stolen, probably by someone passing through. And then we had 1 old gelding who just gave out. He was 22, so it was his time, but still hard to lose him. He was the first horse I bought when I started this place." There was genuine affection in his voice when he spoke about the old horse, and Clara found herself warming to him even more. A man who cared about his animals was often a man worth knowing. They ate lunch on the porch, served by a gruff older man Colt introduced as his cook, Hank. The stew was indeed excellent, thick with beef and vegetables, accompanied by fresh bread and strong coffee. As they ate, They discussed specifics. Colt needed horses between 4 and 10 years old, broke to saddle, with good temperament and solid conformation. He was willing to pay fair market price, maybe a bit more for exceptional animals. I have heard there is a rancher down near Colorado Springs who might be selling off some of his stock, Clara said, mentally going through the contacts she had built over the years. And there is a horse trader who passes through Denver every few weeks. He usually has good animals, though you have to watch him on the pricing. He will try to charge twice what they are worth if he thinks he can get away with it. Colt nodded, listening carefully. What do you think about taking a trip down to Colorado Springs next week? We could check out that rancher, maybe stop in Denver on the way back. I can cover the travel expenses, and we can stay in hotels along the way. Separate rooms, of course, he added quickly, as if suddenly realizing how his suggestion might sound. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice steady. That would be acceptable. I would need to make arrangements for my animals, but my friend Margaret could look after them for a few days. Good. We will plan to leave Monday morning if that works for you. Should take us 3 days to get down there, a few days to conduct business, and 3 days back. Call it 10 days total to be safe. They finalized a few more details, and then Clara was riding back toward her ranch, her mind spinning with everything they had discussed. 10 days traveling with Colt Spencer. The thought made her nervous in a way she had not felt in years, a fluttering anxiety mixed with something that might have been anticipation. Margaret was predictably excited when Clara told her about the trip. 10 days with a handsome rancher, Margaret said, clapping her hands together. Clara, this is wonderful. It is business, Clara insisted, though her protests sounded weak even to her own ears. He needs horses and I am helping him find them, that is all. Of course, Margaret agreed, but her smile suggested she thought otherwise. Still, it will be good for you to get away from the ranch for a while. You work too hard and never have any adventures. Clara did not argue, mainly because Margaret was right. Her life had become small and predictable, the same routines day after day. The trip would be different if nothing else. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Clara mended a split seam in her travel bag, packed her spare clothing, and gave Margaret detailed instructions about caring for the horses. She tried not to think too much about Monday morning, about spending so many days in close quarters with Colt Spencer, but her mind kept drifting back to him. The way he had looked at her without flinching, the way he spoke to her with respect, the way his hands had moved confidently as he worked, strong and capable. Stop it, she told herself firmly. This is business. He is hiring you for a job, nothing more. Do not turn it into something it is not. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for traveling. Colt arrived at her ranch just after sunrise, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. He had traded his work clothes for slightly better ones, though still practical for the trail, and had shaved, she noticed. The sharp planes of his face were even more striking without the stubble. Ready? He asked, and she nodded, mounting Rusty with practiced ease. They set out south, following the road toward Colorado Springs. The first few hours passed mostly in silence, both of them focused on the trail ahead. But as the morning wore on, Colt began to talk, telling her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about taking his younger sister west to live with an aunt. That sister, the one who married the man who cheated her, Clara said, remembering what he had mentioned before. Is she all right now? Colt's jaw tightened slightly. She is. After her husband died, she came back to live with me for a while. She has since remarried, a good man this time, a carpenter in Denver. They have 2 children and seem happy. You helped her, Clara observed. It was not a question. She is family. Of course I helped her. He glanced over at her. Do you have siblings? No. It was just me and my father after my mother passed. That must have been lonely. Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the sympathy in his voice. I had the horses, and my father made sure I could take care of myself. He taught me to shoot, to track, to read the weather. Said he would not leave me helpless in the world. Sounds like a good man. He was. They stopped for lunch beside a creek, letting the horses drink and graze while they ate the sandwiches Hank had packed. Clara sat on a fallen log, watching the water ripple over smooth stones, aware of Colt sitting a few feet away. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer awkward. "Can I ask you something?" Colt said after a while. Clara tensed slightly, waiting. This was usually when people asked about her scar, their curiosity finally overcoming their manners. "How did you learn so much about horses? I mean, I can tell when someone really knows what they are talking about, and you clearly do." The question surprised her. "My father bred horses before I was born. Quarter horses mostly, good working stock. He taught me everything, how to read their conformation, how to spot health problems, how to train them properly. After he died, I had to sell most of them to pay debts, but the knowledge stayed. That is a valuable skill. You could probably make a good living as a horse trader if you wanted." Clara had thought about it, but starting such a business required capital she did not have. "Maybe someday," she said non-committally. They remounted and continued south. By late afternoon, they reached a small town called Pine Grove, little more than a collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads. Colt led them to the only hotel, a modest two-story structure that looked clean enough. He arranged for 2 rooms as promised, and they agreed to meet for dinner in an hour. Clara carried her bag upstairs, grateful for the chance to wash the trail dust from her face and hands. The room was simple but adequate, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. She changed into her other skirt, brushed out her hair and re-pinned it, and tried not to think about how this felt almost like some kind of strange courtship. Traveling together, eating meals together, spending entire days in each other's company. But it was not courtship, she reminded herself firmly. Colt Spencer was a businessman who needed horses. She was someone he had hired to help. That was all. Dinner was served in the hotel's small dining room, beef and potatoes with surprisingly good gravy. Colt talked more about his ranch, about his plans for expansion, about the challenges of running a business in territory that was still relatively wild and unsettled. Clara found herself talking too, more than she usually did, telling stories about horses she had known, disasters she had witnessed, small triumphs and funny mishaps. At one point, Colt laughed at something she said, a genuine sound of amusement, and Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. She could not remember the last time she had made someone laugh. They retired to their separate rooms as full darkness fell. Clara lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night, and wondered what she was doing. This trip suddenly felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with bandits or rough terrain. It felt dangerous because she was starting to like Colt Spencer, starting to look forward to his smile and his conversation, starting to forget all the reasons she had stopped hoping for things like this. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. They rode during the day, talking or riding in companionable silence, stopping to rest the horses and eat the supplies Hank had packed. They stayed in small towns along the way, always in separate rooms, always proper and respectful. And slowly, almost without Clara realizing it, something was building between them, some connection that went beyond simple business. Colt was easy to talk to, she discovered. He listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and never once made her feel less than capable. He told her about his struggles starting the ranch, about the loneliness of building something alone, about his hope that someday he might have a family to pass it on to. "You want to marry?" Clara asked one evening as they sat outside a small hotel in a town called Woodland Park. The question surprised her as soon as she asked it, too personal, too direct, but Colt did not seem offended. "I do," he said simply, "but I have not found the right woman yet. Most of the women I meet either want nothing to do with ranch life, or they are only interested in whatever money they think I have." He paused, looking out at the darkening sky. "What about you? Do you want to marry?" Clara's throat tightened. The honest answer was complicated, a tangle of old dreams and current reality. "I used to want that," she said carefully, "but I have learned to be content with what I have." "That is not really an answer," Colt said gently. "It is the only answer I have." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara forced herself not to turn away, not to hide her face in shadow. Let him see, she thought with sudden defiance. Let him see the scar and understand why marriage was never going to be part of her future. But Colt's expression did not change. He just nodded slowly and said, "I think sometimes we convince ourselves we do not want something because it is easier than hoping and being disappointed." Clara had no response to that, so they sat in silence until the mosquitoes drove them inside. They reached Colorado Springs on the afternoon of the fourth day. The town was larger than Georgetown, sprawling and busy with commerce from the railroad and the various ranches in the area. Colt had sent a telegram ahead, and they went directly to the ranch of a man named Peterson, who was supposedly selling horses. Peterson turned out to be a weathered man in his 60s, looking to reduce his stock before winter. He had about 30 horses to choose from, and Clara walked among them slowly, examining each one carefully. She checked teeth to verify age, ran her hands down legs to check for old injuries, watched how they moved and interacted with each other. In the end, she selected 7 horses that met Colt's requirements. They were good animals, well cared for, and Peterson's prices were fair. Colt paid him, and they arranged to pick up the horses on their way back north. "You have a good eye," Peterson told Clara as they were leaving. "Those are 7 of my best animals. I would have chosen the same ones myself." The compliment pleased her more than it probably should have. They spent 2 more days in Colorado Springs, checking the horse auctions and visiting another rancher who had animals for sale. Clara found 4 more horses, bringing their total to 11. They were slightly over halfway to Colt's goal, and he was clearly pleased with her work. "We can check Denver on the way back," he said as they loaded supplies for the return journey. "But honestly, if we do not find any more, what you have already found is excellent, quality over quantity." They left Colorado Springs early, planning to make good time back north. But fate, as it often did, had other plans. They were about 3 hours outside the town when one of the pack horse's shoes came loose. Colt dismounted to check it, and Clara watched as he examined the hoof carefully. "We need to find a farrier," he said, standing. "There is a small settlement about an hour ahead if I remember correctly. We can get it fixed there." But before they could remount, the sound of gunfire cracked through the air, sharp and startling. Clara's horse shied, and she fought to control him, her heart suddenly racing. More shots followed, coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. "Get off the road," Colt said sharply, already moving. They led the horses into the cover of trees, tying them quickly before Colt pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "Stay here." "I have a gun too," Clara said, reaching for her own rifle. Colt looked like he wanted to argue, but another burst of gunfire made the decision for him. They moved carefully through the trees, following the sound. After a few minutes, they could see the source, A overturned wagon on the road with a man and woman crouched behind it, firing at 3 men on horseback who were circling like wolves. "Bandits," Colt muttered. "Probably after whatever they have in the wagon." The man behind the wagon fired again, but his shot went wide. One of the bandits laughed and returned fire, the bullet striking the wagon with a solid thunk. "We need to help them," Clara said. Colt nodded. "I will circle around, come at them from the left. You stay here and cover the couple. If the bandits get too close, shoot. Aim for the horses if you have to." Before Clara could respond, he was moving, disappearing into the trees with surprising silence. Clara positioned herself behind a large pine, steadying her rifle against the trunk. Her father had taught her to shoot, and she had practiced regularly, bringing down deer and elk to supplement her food supply. But she had never aimed at a person before. One of the bandits spurred his horse forward, clearly planning to rush the wagon. Clara took a breath, aimed carefully at the ground in front of the horse and fired. The shot kicked up dirt and rocks, causing the horse to rear violently. The bandit cursed and fought for control, abandoning his charge. A moment later, Colt's rifle cracked from the left, and one of the bandits yelled, grabbing his arm. The 3 men wheeled their horses, suddenly realizing they were being fired on from multiple directions. Colt fired again. This shot clearly meant as a warning, and the bandits seemed to make a quick decision. They turned and galloped away, disappearing around a bend in the road. Clara and Colt emerged from the trees, rifles still ready, but the bandits were gone. The couple behind the wagon stood slowly, the man keeping his gun raised until he got a good look at them. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice shaking. She was young, probably early 20s, with dark hair and frightened eyes. "They came out of nowhere. We thought we were going to die." "Are either of you hurt?" Colt asked, already moving to check the overturned wagon. "No, just shaken," the man replied. He was around the same age as the woman, with sandy hair and the look of someone not accustomed to frontier violence. "We are from Pennsylvania, on our way to Denver. Someone told us this road was safe." "Most of the time it is," Colt said. He examined the wagon's broken wheel, his expression grim. "But there are always men looking for easy targets. What happened here?" "The wheel just gave out," the man explained. "We were trying to fix it when those men showed up. They wanted everything we had." Clara helped the woman sit down while Colt and the man worked on righting the wagon. The damage was worse than it initially appeared. The wheel was not just broken but shattered, and the axle was cracked. "This wagon is not going anywhere without major repairs," Colt said finally. "We can take you to the next town, but we cannot carry all your belongings." The couple, who introduced themselves as David and Emma Porter, looked devastated. Their wagon contained everything they owned, all their worldly possessions packed for a new life in the West. "We will have to hide what we can and come back for it," David said, trying to sound optimistic. "Better to lose our things than our lives." It took another hour to sort through their belongings, hiding the larger items in the brush and loading what they could onto the pack horse. Emma rode with Clara while David rode behind Colt, and they made their way to the settlement Colt had mentioned earlier. The town was called Hartley, barely large enough to deserve the name, but it had a general store, a blacksmith, and a small boarding house. They got the Porters settled and arranged for the blacksmith to go back with David the next morning to retrieve and repair their wagon. "I cannot thank you enough," Emma said to Clara as they stood outside the boarding house. "If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what would have happened." "I am glad we could help," Clara replied honestly. That night, over dinner in the boarding house's tiny dining room, the 4 of them talked. David and Emma were newlyweds, married just 3 months ago, coming west because David had been offered a clerk position with a mining company in Denver. They were nervous about the frontier, excited about the adventure and still clearly very much in love, constantly touching hands and exchanging glances. Watching them, Clara felt a pang of something she did not want to name. This was what she had once dreamed of, this easy affection, this partnership. But dreams were dangerous things, and she had learned to live without them. After dinner, Colt walked with her outside where the evening air was cooling rapidly. "You did well today," he said. "Not many people would have helped like that," Clara shrugged. "You would have helped them regardless. I just followed your lead. You handled yourself well with the rifle, and you kept calm. Those are not small things." He paused, then added quietly, "Your father taught you well." Something about the way he said it, the respect in his voice, made Clara's throat tight. "Thank you," she managed. They stood in silence for a moment, and Clara was acutely aware of how close Colt was standing, close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and soap and something else that was distinctly him. "Clara," he said, and the way he said her name made her look up. His expression was serious, almost intense. "Can I ask you something personal?" Her heart began to beat faster. "All right. Why do you flinch whenever someone compliments you? Why do you look surprised when I treat you with respect? What happened to make you think so little of yourself?" The questions hit her like physical blows. She took a step back, her hand instinctively rising to her scarred cheek. "You do not understand," she said, her voice tight. "Then help me understand." Clara wanted to walk away, to retreat to her room and avoid this conversation entirely. But something in Colt's eyes kept her rooted in place. He genuinely wanted to know, she realized. He was not asking out of idle curiosity, but because her answer actually mattered to him. "I was told many times that no man would ever love me," she said finally, the words coming out flat and hard. "That I was too scarred, too damaged, too unmarriageable. And every man who ever showed interest in me eventually proved those words right, so I stopped hoping. I stopped looking. I made peace with being alone." Colt's expression shifted, something like anger flashing across his face. "Who told you that? Who would say something so cruel? Does it matter? People in town, men who rejected me, my own reflection every morning." She laughed bitterly. "The truth does not stop being true just because you find it cruel." "It is not truth," Colt said fiercely. "It is ignorance and cruelty, but it is not truth." Clara shook her head, suddenly exhausted. "I am going to bed. We have a long ride tomorrow." She turned and walked away before he could respond, before the tears burning behind her eyes could fall. She made it to her room and closed the door, leaning against it, her whole body trembling. Why had she told him that? Why had she opened up that old wound and let him see how deeply it ran? She barely slept that night, her mind replaying the conversation, cringing at her own vulnerability. By morning, she had resolved to keep things strictly professional for the rest of the trip. No more personal conversations, no more late evening talks, just business. But Colt had other ideas. When they set out the next morning, leaving the porters to wait for their wagon repairs, he rode close beside her and said quietly, "I am sorry if I pushed too hard last night, but I am not sorry I asked." Clara kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "Can we just focus on finding horses?" "Of course." "But Clara, I want you to know something." He waited until she looked at him. "You were wrong about what you said last night, not about what people told you that probably did happen and it was wrong, but you were wrong about it being truth. The right man would count himself lucky to have you, scar and all." "You do not know that," Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I do know it, because I am starting to think I might be that man." Clara's breath stopped. Her hands tightened on the reins, and Rusty tossed his head at the sudden tension. "Do not," she said, the word coming out almost as a plea, Please do not say things like that if you do not mean them. I do mean them. Colt's voice was steady, sure. I did not plan this, Clara. When I hired you, I was only thinking about horses. But spending these days with you, talking with you, watching how you handle yourself, I have realized something. I like you. I admire you. And I would very much like to court you properly if you would allow it. Clara felt like the world had tilted sideways. This could not be happening. Men like Colt Spencer did not fall for women like her. This was some kind of mistake, some misunderstanding that would end in humiliation when he realized what he was saying. You do not know me well enough to say that, she managed. Then let me get to know you better. That is what courting is for. He smiled slightly. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am just asking for a chance. Why? The question burst out of her. Why me? You could have any woman in Colorado. Why would you want someone who looks like I do? Colt's expression turned serious again. Because when I look at you, I do not see a scar. I see a woman who is intelligent and capable and kind. I see someone who saved a couple from bandits without a second thought. I see someone who knows horses better than most men I have met. I see someone who makes me laugh and who I actually enjoy talking to. You know how rare that is. Clara wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe him. But years of rejection had built walls that could not be torn down with a few kind words. I need to think, she said quietly. Take all the time you need, Colt replied. I am not going anywhere. They rode on, the silence between them no longer comfortable but charged with everything unsaid. Clara's mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened, trying to decide if Colt was sincere, or if this was another cruel joke the universe was playing on her. They stopped in Denver 2 days later, a city much larger and busier than Georgetown or even Colorado Springs. Clara had been there a few times over the years, but it never failed to impress her with its energy and constant motion. People crowded the streets, wagons and horses competing for space, the sound of construction mixing with vendors hawking their wares. Colt knew the city well and led them directly to a large horse trader he had worked with before. The man, a transplanted Irishman named O'Connor, had a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. He showed them to his corrals on the edge of town, where at least 50 horses milled around. Clara examined them carefully, taking her time despite O'Connor's attempts to hurry her along. She found 5 horses that met Colt's standards, including a particularly fine buckskin mare that would make an excellent addition to his breeding program if he decided to go that route. You have found me 16 horses in less than a week, Colt said as they finalized the purchase with O'Connor. That is more than I expected. If we can find 4 more, we will be done. O'Connor, overhearing this, spoke up. I might know someone. Fellow named James Cordell has a small ranch about halfway between here and Georgetown. He lost his wife last year and has been talking about selling off his stock and moving back east to be near his daughter. Might have exactly what you are looking for. Colt got directions, and they headed out the next morning after arranging for O'Connor to keep the horses they had purchased until they could pick them up with the others. The Cordell Ranch was indeed about halfway to Georgetown, tucked into a pretty valley with good water and grazing. James Cordell turned out to be a man in his 50s, grief-worn but still strong. His wife had been dead for 18 months, Clara learned, and the ranch felt empty now, too big for one man alone. He showed them his horses with obvious pride despite his plans to sell them. These are beautiful animals, Clara said honestly, watching a young roan gelding trot across the paddock. Cordell had clearly taken excellent care of his stock. My wife loved horses, James said softly. Said they were God's way of giving us wings without having to fly. After she passed, I tried to keep things going the way she would have wanted, but my heart is not in it anymore. My daughter keeps writing, begging me to come live near her and her family in Pennsylvania. I think it is time. They ended up buying 6 horses from him, more than they needed, but Clara could not bear to split up the matched pair of gray mares, and Colt agreed. That brought their total to 22 horses, exceeding the original goal. "You have done incredible work," Colt said as they prepared to leave the Cordell Ranch. "Better than I hoped." James Cordell walked them to their horses, then paused. "Can I say something?" he asked, looking between them. When they nodded, he continued, "I lost the love of my life. The best thing I ever did was marry Margaret, and the worst day of my life was burying her. But I would not trade a single day we had together, even knowing how it would end. Love is worth it, even when it hurts." He was looking at Clara as he spoke, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he had somehow seen through her in the few hours they had spent there. "Do not let fear keep you from taking a chance," James added. "I see how you two look at each other when you think the other is not watching. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time being afraid." They thanked him and rode away, but his words echoed in Clara's mind for the rest of the day. Did she look at Colt when he was not watching? Did he look at her the same way? That night, they stopped at a small inn. Over dinner, Colt brought up the topic she had been avoiding. "Have you thought about what I said? About courting?" Clara set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "I have thought about little else. And I am terrified," she admitted. "Every time I have let myself hope, I have ended up hurt. I do not know if I can survive that again." Colt reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "I cannot promise you will never be hurt. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will never hurt you intentionally. I can promise that when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary. And I can promise that if you give me a chance, I will do everything in my power to prove I am worth your trust." Clara looked at his hand, so close to hers. It would be so easy to close that distance, to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But years of self-protection warred with the growing feelings she could no longer deny. "What if you change your mind?" she whispered. "What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake?" "Then I will be a fool," Colt said simply. "But Clara, I do not think that is going to happen. These feelings did not come out of nowhere. They have been building since the moment you stood in your pasture and agreed to help me, all business and competence. They grew every time you examined a horse, and I saw how much you know and love what you do. They deepened every time we talked, and I realized how much I enjoy your company. This is not a whim or an impulse. This is real." Clara felt tears pricking her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She was 26 years old, too old to cry over a man's pretty words. But these were not just pretty words, she realized. Colt meant every one of them. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. "All right," she said, the word barely audible. "All right," Colt repeated, hope lighting his face. "All right, you can court me, but slowly. I need time to adjust to this." "As slow as you need," Colt promised. His hand finally closed over hers, warm and solid, and Clara felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in a sliver of light she had thought was extinguished forever. They stayed there for a moment, hands clasped across the table, the rest of the inn fading away until it was just the two of them and the terrifying, wonderful possibility of something new. The ride back to Georgetown took on a different quality after that conversation. They still talked about horses and ranches and practical matters, but now there were also long conversations about hopes and dreams, about childhoods and losses, about all the small things that made them who they were. Colt told her about his parents, about the fear of being responsible for his sister at such a young age, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Clara told him about her mother, about learning to read by lamplight, about the loneliness of losing her father and realizing she was truly alone in the world. "You are not alone anymore," Colt said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. "Even if you decide courtship is not for you, even if we end up just friends, you are not alone. I mean that." Clara believed him. It was strange and new and slightly frightening, but she believed him. They reached Georgetown nearly 2 weeks after they had left, both of them tired but satisfied with their work. Margaret met Clara at her ranch, full of questions about the trip. "Something happened," Margaret said, studying Clara's face. "You look different." "Colt Spencer asked to court me," Clara said, the words still feeling unreal. Margaret shrieked and hugged her so hard they both nearly fell over. "I knew it. I knew something would happen on that trip. Oh, Clara, this is wonderful." "It is terrifying," Clara corrected, but she was smiling despite herself. "That too, but mostly wonderful." Over the next few weeks, Colt proved true to his word about courting properly. He came by Clara's ranch several times a week, always with a reason that sounded like business but usually turned into long conversations on her porch. He brought her small gifts, a new bridle for Rusty that was much nicer than her old one, a book about horse breeding he thought she would find interesting, fresh vegetables from his cook's garden. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would make her uncomfortable, but thoughtful things that showed he was paying attention to what she liked and needed. He also introduced her to his ranch hands, making it clear that she was important to him. The men were polite and respectful, and Clara appreciated that Colt had clearly prepared them to treat her well. One afternoon, about a month after they returned from their trip, Colt invited Clara to see the horses they had purchased, all 22 now settled into his paddocks. They walked among them, Clara assessing how each animal was adapting to their new home, offering advice on training and placement. "They are doing well," she said, watching the buckskin mare she had particularly admired. "That mare is going to be a treasure for your breeding program if you decide to keep her." "I am keeping her," Colt said. "Actually, I want to give her to you." Clara turned to him, startled. "What? No, Colt, I cannot accept that. She is worth a small fortune." "Consider it payment for helping me find these horses. You saved me months of work and probably got me better animals than I would have found on my own. Besides," he added with a smile, "I want you to have her. You saw her potential immediately. She should be yours." Clara wanted to argue, but the mare truly was a magnificent animal, and the thought of owning her made something in Clara's chest ache with longing. "That is too generous," she said, but her protest was weak. "Please accept her," Colt said. "It would make me happy." So Clara accepted, leading the mare back to her own ranch that afternoon, tears in her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. The mare, which she decided to name Star for the perfect white marking on her forehead, quickly became one of Clara's most prized possessions. Margaret continued to be excited about the courtship, often stopping by to hear the latest developments. "Has he kissed you yet?" she would ask, and Clara would blush and shake her head. The truth was, Colt had been almost frustratingly proper in his courtship. He held her hand when they walked, stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, but he had not made any move to kiss her. Part of Clara appreciated his restraint, his willingness to let her set the pace. But another part of her, a part she had thought was dead, wanted more. It was early October, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, when Colt finally asked her to attend the town social with him. Clara's first instinct was to refuse. She had avoided the socials for years, unable to bear watching other couples dance while she stood alone. "I do not think that is a good idea," she said when he brought it up. "Why not?" Colt asked gently. "Because the whole town will talk. They will wonder why you are with me. They will make comments." "Let them talk," Colt said firmly. "Clara, I want to dance with you. I want everyone in Georgetown to see that we are courting. I want them to know that you are spoken for. Unless," he added, suddenly uncertain, "you are ashamed to be seen with me." "What? No." Clara was shocked that he could think such a thing. "Colt, you are successful and respected and handsome. Why would I ever be ashamed of you?" "Then, what is the real reason you do not want to go?" Clara looked away, embarrassed. "I do not want you to see their reactions. I do not want you to see the pity and the confusion when people realize you chose me." Colt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I understand your fear, but Clara, hiding from the world is not living, and I think you have been hiding for too long. Come with me. Let them see us together. Let them think whatever they want. Their opinions do not matter, only ours do." He was right, Clara realized. She had been hiding, telling herself she was being practical when really she was just afraid, and fear was no way to live. "All right," she said. "I will go." Margaret, when she heard, immediately insisted on helping Clara prepare. She brought over a blue dress she had purchased in Denver but never worn, claiming it did not fit her right but would be perfect for Clara. The dress was simple but lovely, with a fitted bodice and full skirt, the color bringing out the blue in Clara's eyes. "You look beautiful," Margaret said as Clara examined herself in the mirror the night of the social. And for the first time in years, Clara almost believed it. Not because the scar had disappeared, or because she looked like someone else, but because she saw herself through Colt's eyes, as someone worthy of being seen. Colt arrived to pick her up in a wagon he had cleaned until it shone, the horses brushed and gleaming. He was dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that made him look even more handsome than usual. When he saw Clara, his expression transformed into something that made her heart skip. "You are stunning," he said simply. The social was held in the town hall, already full of people when they arrived. Clara felt every eye turn toward them as they entered, heard the whispers start immediately. But Colt kept his hand steady on her back, guiding her into the room with confidence. They found seats along the wall and Colt went to get them punch. As soon as he left, several women approached Clara, curiosity written on their faces. "Clara Sullivan, I heard you were courting Colt Spencer," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How lovely for you." "Thank you," Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. "It is so nice to see a man willing to overlook certain things," Mrs. Henderson continued, her eyes flickering to Clara's scar. "True Christian charity." The word stung, even though Clara had expected something similar. Before she could respond, Colt was back, handing her a cup of punch. "Mrs. Henderson," he said coolly, "I could not help but overhear your comment. Let me be clear. I am not overlooking anything about Clara except perhaps her annoying habit of being too modest about her accomplishments. She is intelligent, kind, and the best judge of horses I have ever met. Any man would be lucky to have her attention, and I count myself fortunate that she has agreed to court me. If you cannot understand that, perhaps you should examine your own failings rather than commenting on others." Mrs. Henderson's face turned an unpleasant shade of red. She sputtered for a moment, then turned and walked away stiffly. Clara looked up at Colt, stunned. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Colt said firmly. "You deserve to be defended, Clara. And anyone who treats you with anything less than respect will answer to me." The band started playing and Colt set down their cups. "May I have this dance?" Clara's heart was pounding, but she placed her hand in his and let him lead her onto the floor. She had not danced in years, but Colt was a skilled partner, guiding her easily through the steps. Clara was intensely aware of his hand at her waist, of how close he held her, of the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "Everyone is staring," she murmured. "Let them," Colt replied. "I am dancing with the prettiest woman here. You do not have to say things like that. I am not saying it because I have to. I am saying it because it is true. Clara, when are you going to start believing me when I tell you how extraordinary you are?" Clara looked up at him, at his earnest expression, and felt something inside her finally break free. The walls she had built around her heart, the protections she had put in place, all came crumbling down in that moment. She believed him. Not because he was being kind or charitable, but because his feelings were written clearly on his face for everyone to see. "I think I am starting to believe you," she whispered. Colt's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. They danced through 3 more songs, and by the end of the evening most of the town had seen them together, had witnessed how Colt looked at her, had heard how he defended her. Clara knew there would still be gossip, still be people who did not understand, but it mattered less now. What mattered was the man holding her hand as he walked her back to his wagon. "Thank you for coming tonight," Colt said as they drove back toward her ranch. "I know it was difficult." "It was," Clara admitted, "but it was also good. You were right about hiding. I have been doing it for too long." They reached her ranch, and Colt helped her down from the wagon. The moon was bright overhead, casting everything in silver light. They stood there for a moment, and Clara felt the tension building between them, the awareness that something was about to shift. "Clara," Colt said softly. "May I kiss you?" Clara's breath caught. Every fear she had ever had about intimacy, about letting someone close enough to hurt her, rose up in her throat. But stronger than the fear was the desire to know what it felt like to be kissed by someone who truly cared for her. "Yes," she whispered. Colt cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her scarred cheek with such tenderness that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and perfect. It was nothing like the awkward, fumbling kisses she had experienced in her youth, nothing like the dreams she had given up on. It was better than anything she had imagined, full of promise and care and the beginning of something real. When they finally pulled apart, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon to say it, that we have not been courting long, but I cannot keep it in anymore. I love you, Clara Sullivan." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I did not think I could, but I do." They stood there holding each other under the moonlight, and Clara felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that included love and partnership, and all the things she had convinced herself were impossible. The next few months were the happiest of Clara's life. She and Colt continued courting, but it was clear to everyone that this was heading toward marriage. They talked about the future openly now, about combining their properties, about the children they both wanted, about growing old together. In December, as snow began to dust the mountains, Colt officially proposed. He did it simply, without fanfare, on her front porch where they had spent so many evenings talking. "Marry me," he said, pulling out a simple gold ring. "Build a life with me. Let me spend every day proving that you are loved and valued and cherished." "Yes," Clara said, not even needing to think about it. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in February of 1879 in a small ceremony in Georgetown's church. Margaret stood up with Clara, and Colt's sister and her family came from Denver. The church was full despite the winter weather, and if some people came out of curiosity rather than genuine happiness, Clara found she did not care. All that mattered was Colt, standing at the altar, watching her walk toward him with love shining in his eyes. The preacher, an older man named Reverend Williams, spoke about commitment and partnership and choosing love every day. Then he said something that made Clara's throat tight with emotion. "Sometimes," Reverend Williams said, looking directly at Clara and Colt, "love finds us when we stop looking for it. Sometimes it comes in unexpected ways from unexpected people at unexpected times, but that does not make it any less real or precious. In fact, those are often the deepest, truest loves because they are not based on superficial things but on genuine connection and respect." After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the hotel. People came up to congratulate them, and Clara was surprised by how many seemed genuinely happy for them. Perhaps Colt's obvious devotion had changed some minds, or perhaps she had simply stopped caring what people thought. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, which felt both strange and wonderful. Colt was gentle and patient, making Clara feel cherished rather than nervous. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Clara marveled at how different her life was from what she had expected just months ago. "No regrets?" Colt asked, running his fingers through her hair. "None," Clara said honestly. "This is more than I ever dreamed possible. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." They moved Clara's belongings to the Spencer ranch over the next week, combining her 3 horses with Colt's growing herd. Clara sold her small property to a young couple just starting out, using the money to buy more breeding stock. She and Colt were now full partners in the ranch, her expertise with horses proving invaluable as they expanded the operation. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Clara helped manage the horses, while Colt oversaw the cattle operation. They worked together easily, their skills complementing each other. The ranch hands, seeing how Colt valued Clara's opinion, quickly learned to respect her as well. Margaret visited often, delighted to see Clara so happy. "I told you," she would say, grinning. "I told you that you would find someone." "I did not find him," Clara would reply. "He found me." Same result either way. In the summer of 1880, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Colt, worried about childbirth, about being a mother, about all the things that could go wrong. But when she finally shared the news, Colt picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying. "Clara, we are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was mostly uneventful, though Clara was sick for the first few months and uncomfortable toward the end. Colt fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement and occasional annoyance. He brought her anything she wanted, insisted she rest more, and generally treated her like she was made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Clara reminded him. "I am not fragile." "You are precious," Colt replied firmly. "There is a difference." Their son was born in March of 1881, after a long but ultimately successful labor. Colt held the baby with such wonder and tenderness that Clara fell in love with him all over again. "What should we name him?" Colt asked, carefully supporting the tiny head. They had discussed names but had not decided definitively. Looking at her husband holding their son, Clara suddenly knew exactly what the baby should be called. "James," she said, "after the man who told us not to let fear keep us from taking a chance." Colt's eyes grew misty. "James Cordell Spencer. I like that. Do you think he would mind?" "I think he would be honored." They sent a letter to James Cordell in Pennsylvania, telling him about the baby and thanking him again for his wisdom. He wrote back a warm letter of congratulations, saying he was deeply touched by their choice, and that little James had big shoes to fill with a name like that. Baby James was a healthy, happy child who seemed to have inherited his mother's way with animals, and his father's easy nature. As he grew, Clara would often find him in the barn, talking to the horses in his babbling toddler language, fearless in a way that both terrified and delighted her. 2 years after James was born, Clara had a daughter they named Sarah, after no one in particular, but simply because they both liked the name. Sarah was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with Clara's blue eyes and Colt's dark hair. Life was full and busy and sometimes chaotic, but Clara had never been happier. She thought often about the woman she had been, convinced she would die alone, certain that love was not meant for her. How wrong she had been. One evening, when James was 5 and Sarah was 3, Clara stood on the porch watching Colt teach their son to rope a fence post. Sarah sat beside her, playing with a doll Margaret had made. The sun was setting, painting everything in warm gold light, and Clara felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Colt looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that same smile that had first broken through her defenses, and mouthed, "I love you," across the yard. Clara smiled back, mouthing the words in return, then watched as he turned back to James, patiently adjusting the boy's grip on the rope. Margaret visited that weekend, as she often did. She had married a teacher who moved to Georgetown, a kind man named Robert, and they seemed very happy together. As the two women sat on the porch watching the children play, Margaret said, "Do you ever think about how different your life could have been if Colt had not needed to buy horses?" Clara considered this. "Sometimes, but I think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are meant to be." "That is very romantic of you," Margaret teased. "Not like the practical Clara I used to know." "Love changed me," Clara admitted. "It opened up parts of myself I thought were closed forever. It looks good on you. Happiness looks good on you." As the years passed, the Spencer Ranch continued to grow and prosper. They had 3 more children, twin boys born in 1886 named Daniel and David, and a final daughter in 1888 they named Margaret in honor of Clara's friend. The house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, adding rooms and a larger kitchen. Clara's reputation as a horse expert grew throughout Colorado. People came from all over to buy animals she had bred and trained. She developed a particular talent for matching horses with riders, somehow knowing instinctively which animal would suit which person. The business expanded until they had one of the most respected horse operations in the state. James Cordell visited once, making the long journey from Pennsylvania to meet his namesake and see the ranch. He was older and more frail, but his eyes still sparkled with life. He spent a week with them, telling stories about his late wife and delighting in the chaos of their full household. "You two did well," he told Clara on the evening before he left. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. "You built something real and lasting." "Thank you for your advice all those years ago," Clara said. "I do not know if I would have had the courage without it." "You had the courage already," James said. "I just helped you see it." He died peacefully 6 months later, and Colt and Clara made the journey to Pennsylvania for the funeral. His daughter thanked them for honoring her father with their son's name, and Clara was grateful they had made the effort to maintain their connection with the man who had inadvertently changed their lives. The children grew. James became a skilled horseman like his mother, eventually taking over the breeding program. Sarah surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for numbers and began handling the ranch's accounts. The twins were still young but showed signs of following in their father's footsteps with the cattle. And little Margaret, barely 2 years old, was already showing signs of being the family charmer. Clara was in her late 30s now, her face showing the lines of laughter and sun, her body stronger from years of hard work. The scar that had once defined her was now just a part of her face, something she barely thought about. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a wife and mother, a successful businesswoman, a woman who was loved and valued. One evening in the summer of 1890, Clara and Colt sat on their porch after the children were finally in bed. It had been a long day, full of the usual chaos of a household with 5 children, and they were both tired but content. "You remember the first time we sat out here?" Colt asked, reaching for Clara's hand. "Of course. You had just told me you wanted to court me. I thought you had lost your mind." Colt laughed. "Maybe I had, or maybe I had finally found it." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of knowing each other deeply. Clara thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The accident that had scarred her face, the years of loneliness, the men who had rejected her, the decision to give up on love. All of it had seemed like tragedy at the time, but it had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. "I used to think my scar was a curse," Clara said quietly, "that it marked me as unlovable. And now," Colt asked, "now I think maybe it was a test. All those men who rejected me, they failed that test. You passed it because you saw past the surface to who I really was. If I had not had the scar, maybe I would have married one of those other men and been miserable. Maybe I needed it to find you." Colt squeezed her hand. "I do not know if I believe in fate, but I do know I am grateful for whatever brought us together. You and the children are the best things in my life. Even when the twins put a frog in your boot, even then," Colt said, laughing, "though I may feel differently if they try it again." More years passed, bringing new challenges and joys. The children grew into young adults with lives and dreams of their own. James married a girl from Denver and brought her to live on the ranch, promising to raise his own children there. Sarah shocked everyone by deciding to become a teacher like Margaret, heading off to school in Colorado Springs. The twins stayed on the ranch, as devoted to it as their father. And young Margaret, true to form, charmed her way through Georgetown society and ended up marrying a lawyer, much to everyone's amusement. Clara became a grandmother, marveling at the strange passage of time that had turned her into the matriarch of a large, boisterous family. She thought often of the young woman she had been, so convinced that love was not meant for her, and wished she could go back and tell that woman to hold on, to have faith, that happiness was coming even if she could not see it yet. But she could not go back, so instead she lived forward, savoring each day with the man who had proven that love found you when you stopped looking for it, that the right person would see your value even when you could not see it yourself. One afternoon in the spring of 1900, Clara was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. She was 52 years old now, her hair showing threads of silver, her body not quite as strong as it once was but still capable. She had just finished examining the mare when Colt came to find her. "There you are," he said, leaning against the stall door. "I should have known you would be out here." "The mare is close," Clara said. "I wanted to make sure she was comfortable. You have been saying that about this particular mare for 3 days now. I have a feeling about her. Tonight, maybe tomorrow." Colt came into the stall, standing close enough that Clara could feel his warmth. Even after all these years, his presence still made her heart beat a little faster. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. Clara looked up at him, puzzled. "Regret what? Marrying me?" "Building this life. I know it has not always been easy." "Not once," Clara said firmly. "Not for a single moment." "Why would you ask that?" Colt shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "I turned 50 last month. James is talking about taking over more of the operation. I have been thinking about time, about how fast it goes, about whether I have given you the life you deserved." Clara reached up and cupped his face, the same way he had done to her that first night he kissed her. You gave me more than I deserved. You gave me everything I had stopped believing was possible. Love, family, partnership, respect. You made me believe in myself again. How could I possibly regret any of that? I love you, Colt said, the words as sincere as they had been the first time he said them, over 20 years ago. I love you too, Clara replied, more than I can ever adequately express. They stood there in the barn, holding each other while around them the ranch continued its evening routine. Horses nickered softly, cattle lowed in distant pastures, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. The mare did foal that night, a beautiful filly that became one of the foundation mares for the next generation of Spencer horses. Clara stayed with her through the birth, as she always did, marveling at the miracle of new life even after witnessing it hundreds of times. As Clara and Colt grew older, they gradually handed more responsibilities to their children, but never fully retired. They were too connected to the land, too invested in the animals, to ever completely step away. They became the wise elders of the family, the ones grandchildren came to for stories and advice, the steady center around which everyone else orbited. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Georgetown. The ranch was decorated with ribbons and flowers. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and music filled the air. Clara, dressed in a new blue dress that matched her eyes, stood with Colt greeting guests, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. Margaret, now gray-haired herself but still quick to laugh, pulled Clara aside at one point. "Look at all this," she said, gesturing at the celebration. "Look at what you built." "We built," Clara corrected, "Colt and I together." "I remember when you told me you would never find love," Margaret said, "when you were so convinced you were meant to be alone. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. You were scared. But you were brave enough to take a chance when it mattered." Clara watched Colt across the yard, laughing at something one of the twins had said, surrounded by children and grandchildren who clearly adored him. Her husband, her partner, the man who had seen her when no one else did. "I was told I would never find love," Clara said softly, "but I did not find it. It found me. When I had given up looking, when I had made peace with being alone, love walked onto my property asking about horses and changed everything." "That is a good story," Margaret said. "It is a true story," Clara replied. "The best kind." The sun set on their anniversary party, but the celebration continued into the evening, lit by lanterns hung from trees and the porch. Clara and Colt danced together, slower now than they once had but no less connected, their bodies knowing how to move together after 25 years of partnership. "Thank you," Clara whispered as they swayed to the music. "For what?" Colt asked. "For seeing me. For loving me. For proving that I was wrong about my future." "You did the same for me," Colt replied. "I was building a ranch, but I was building it alone. You made it a home. You made it a life worth living." They continued dancing as their children and grandchildren watched, as friends and neighbors smiled and remembered their own love stories, as the mountains stood silent and eternal around them. And Clara knew, with the certainty that comes from lived experience, that love truly did find you when you stopped looking, that the right person would see you for who you really were, that happiness was possible even when you had stopped believing in it. The years continued their steady march. Clara and Colt grew older together, their hair turning white, their steps becoming slower, but their love never diminishing. They sat on their porch most evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about their day or sitting in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. When Clara was 68, she fell ill with a fever that had the whole family worried. But she recovered, stubborn as always, insisting she had too much living left to do. Colt barely left her side during her illness, and Clara realized with profound gratitude that she would never be alone again, not as long as he was alive. They made it to their 40th anniversary, a milestone they celebrated quietly with just their immediate family. By then, they had 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch was thriving under James's management, expanded and improved but still recognizably the place Colt had built from nothing. 40 years, Clara marveled as they sat on their porch that evening. How did we get so old? One day at a time, Colt replied, his voice rougher now but still warm. And I would do every single one of them again if it meant ending up here with you. Even the time the twins set the barn on fire. Even then, Colt said, laughing. Though I could have done without that particular adventure. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about the girl she had been. That scared, lonely young woman who had convinced herself love was not meant for her would be amazed to see this future. To know that everything she had dreamed of and more was waiting, that she just had to hold on long enough for it to find her. I love you, she said, the words as necessary as breathing after all these years. I love you too, Colt replied. Always have, always will. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Clara Sullivan Spencer closed her eyes, content and grateful and loved beyond measure, knowing that her life had turned out exactly as it was meant to, that love had indeed found her when she stopped looking, and that the rancher who had walked onto her property asking about horses had given her everything she had ever needed, and more than she had ever dared to hope for.